Hello and welcome everyone. Super excited for this very special occasion at Pimp My Type about fonts for accessibility. Today we have a super special guest, Eleni Beveratou, type designer and creative director at Dalton Mark, a London-based company designing typefaces for clients around the world. And I'm so happy that Eleni is here, but let's not move on with me talking. Hey Eleni, great that you joined me.
Hi, Oliver. Thank you so much for the invite. I'm very excited too, I have to say.
Yeah,
Really.
really was looking forward to this a long time now because we have a mutual interest, typography. You're a type designer. I am not. I'm just a typography lover, and I'm super excited about everything you're going to share with us today because as well as a teacher, we're all learners and we want to discover much more than we can. So we have a few guests already. Jana, hi, and Mike, hi. Oh, Mike also was on the channel already. Super happy that you are joining. And if you have any questions, so just that you know everyone, type them in the chat. We'll collect a view and then we'll have a Q&A. But let's just kick this off with just getting to know you a bit more, Eleni. What are you interested in when it comes to accessibility and typography? Why did you choose this topic? Why accessibility?
The very first time I chose it was I did my type masters in the University of Reading, and at the time we were asked to pick up a topic for the practical part, but also the dissertation element. And I was trying to think what I want to do, and of course, always when you have to pick a topic, it you always have plenty of ideas and none at the same time, right?
Yeah.
And I've always liked to say that sometimes you let things happen and somehow the idea comes to you. So that's kind of how it worked, because I had to do a small medical thing in my eyes.
Oh,
And they put this liquid where they kind of they put some drops in your eyes, and my vision changed for a whole day, and I got to really realize how difficult it was to do some very simple things. I also had to sign a very important contract that day, and I couldn't read it at all. To the day,
honestly.
I'm not sure if I've signed on the right side of the page or not. Um, but I just realized how accessibility was always a very big thing for me since I was younger. I always kind of cared about how to make a city more accessible, or your environment. But it was the first time that I had to really experience it, and it was just for a few hours, and it made me realize how much of things need to change. So this is where the first time this is where it really kicked in, and so I did my um, I couldn't do my practical, so I wanted to do my practical and theoretical part of the master's, both for accessibility. I couldn't do both at the same time because I was doing research with people partially sighted, and I was writing the report, but it was hard to do at the same time also the practical, because my idea was to create a typeface that would be super accessible for partially sighted people. So I've done only the research bit, at least at uni, and now thankfully I'm in a place where we get to draw a lot of typeface, and
Yeah.
accessibility is a big part of it.
But isn't this a great coincidence in a way that you really experienced this physically and then you went into that you did the research and now you can live it on a daily basis as a
Yes.
type designer and let this information intertwine with your work. So this is just, yeah, a great way to start, I guess. Um, when I started out with this topic, or when I discovered this topic of accessibility, it was for me, like for most people, when you hear about it in the context of the web, it's more about screen readers, blind people. Accessibility is blind people. Blind people means they can't see anyway, and I don't have to
Mm.
care about it because I'm a designer. Who cares? So but of course, we know that's not true. And I found some
Yeah.
recent or some statistics here from the International Agency for the Prevention of Blindness, from the Vision Atlas, and they claimed that 43 million people on the Earth are blind, so they
Yes.
cannot see at all. But there are much more people that have near vision problems, like I have, since I'm using glasses and things. So, and but there are 510 millions of these, and then we have 258 million people that have a mild visual impairment, and 295 million people with a moderate to severe visual impairment. So we have, let's say, roughly 600 million people that have an impairment from mild to more severe. And this alone means it's complicated. It's not like you can see and you can't see. And to make this more accessible and more usable for people that have an impairment, this is, I think, where the tricky part is, because you kind of want to find out what is this space where you can navigate in as a designer when you make design decisions, choosing typefaces and all these things. So how does this all work in context with accessibility, and how do we, let's say, how do we read it all? How do these fundamentals work? For people that have no impairment, but also for people that then have a decreased visual, or they have a visual impairment.
Before I answer to the question, there's something very interesting, and I don't know the numbers exactly, but if I remember well the stats, it's that the majority of people that are blind were not born blind. They kind of develop this as it progressed. So I think what you're mentioning about this kind of gray area, or even if it's not the majority, a lot of people that are blind might not have been blind. So there are people that at some point in the life transition, right? And their vision changes, and it can, alter how they start seeing something that maybe a few years before they would see without any restriction. But when it comes to how we read, so when we are at school, we learn letter by letter, and your teacher has those kind of ways to make you learn how to kind of combine the letters and the sounds. But actually, as we become proficient readers, we stop doing this letter by letter reading. And what our eyes do is that they do those little saccadic movements. So we basically, if we see a sentence, we would start from the beginning, and then we would jump 7 characters further down, and we would focus there. And then we would start taking a few pictures on the left, a few pictures on the right to kind of form the word. And once we have formed that, then we do the next jump. So it's not that it goes letter by letter, but more like little jump and jump and jump, and then kind of forming what's around it. So the quicker we make this kind of recognition and that fixating moment to happen, the faster we will read and go further. There's something interesting, because a lot of people say and ask me whether I've seen those typefaces that start bolder and then they get lighter, and how do I feel about that. And
this was this bionic reading thing that was all the hype a few years ago.
Yes, and I think while the purpose of accessibility is to kind of see information as quickly as possible and kind of understand as quickly as possible, the aim of the game is also not to be the fastest reader in the planet, right? Because there's also cognition that needs to come in. So this is where there is a range, right? It's not that we want people to read a certain information in X amount of time, but it's about making it quicker and easier to process information, both from a visual but also from an understanding perspective.
Yeah, I see. Do you have an example how this looks when you read text, or
yes,
like
this,
this chunks?
I can share my screen and show you. Let me find it. So let me see if this is going to work. It should.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think it's all a bit easier when we have a visual.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you see it now?
Yeah. It's all
perfect.
It's all there. Yeah.
So basically what happens is that if this is the sentence, what our brain does is that it will focus on those letters, but it will do it bit by bit. So it will start here and make a little jump here, and then fixates here, and we'll start taking a few pictures on the left, a few pictures on the right to form the word. And once this has happened, then we move on to the next bit. So if we were to animate this is kind of how we read, basically.
Okay. And if we jump back, it's harder to read because then we have these regression movements, and then we see that, or if things are not making sense or whatever, and you have to jump back, it can be because you cannot process it from the cognitive point of view, or you cannot read it. It's not legible, or
Yes,
what is it
yes.
then?
Yes. So basically, the quicker we make it to kind of understand this part, and see quickly what we read, then we're gonna move faster to the next part. If we go backwards, that's another part of like almost disturbing that pattern, because it's a reverse movement, right? So you've learned to go forward in a specific way. If you go backwards, you even decline even more your speed, and have to backtrack to this.
Yeah, yeah. So what is it then? Is it more about readability then, or is it legibility, or how is it the same? How would you? There, a lot of times people mix up these terms. So
Yes, I always like to say that accessibility is three things, which is legibility, readability, and likability. Legibility is how fast you recognize a C to an O or an A to an E. So it has to do with the individual letter recognition. Readability has less to do about the typeface, but more about the typesetting. So all the things that you talk about, right? About doing good typography, about the hierarchy, the weights that you use, the contrast, color contrast that you're using. And then the last one is my preferred one. It's called likability. And it's a very interesting one because likability, you can't really measure it. You can measure very accurately or scientifically. You can measure legibility, you can measure readability, right? Because you can make user testing and people to kind of count how quickly they would read something versus something else. But asking people what they like, of course they will give you an answer, but that's it can be biased. However, we read best what we read the most. This is not a quote from me, but it's a famous quote that we kind of use in our world, and it it has to do with whatever you feel more comfortable reading with. You will read it faster, which leads to a very important part, which is that very often a lot of typefaces that are not accessible have been used um, by guidelines or by environments as good accessible typefaces. And people get used to read this because their brain starts to decipher it. When you do these saccadic movements, you start to create your own ways of reading those things. And so they created a whole way of deciphering this information, but actually it's technically not legible and neither is readable. But because people are used to it, it has become a habit, and therefore it feels more accessible to them. So we need to be really careful to not kind of introduce those wrong habits, basically, to people, because we will create, wrong accessibility patterns.
Okay, because they are used to a certain typeface or a certain environment, and this is why these typefaces are more familiar, and they kind of learn to
Yes.
understand in that context.
We are creatures of habit, right? Like it could be that you go every day to your office through one route. It might not be the fastest route, but it's the one that you have to think less, or you kind of, are more used to. Whatever brings you good memories or anything, or you rely more on, doesn't mean it's the quickest and best. It's just the one that you've been used to. And it's a bit the same with reading. So we need to be really careful not to introduce those wrong typefaces as good accessible typefaces.
That's a good one. Yeah, we'll come to that in just a moment. I just want to say, or use this occasion to say hello to everyone in the chat already. So we have Anita here, we have Anselm from NYC, we have Yvonne, I think from Hamburg, we have Manuel from Berlin, I guess, and other people like Benjamin and Mike, and I'm super happy that you're here. If you have a question for Eleni, and Manuel has a question for you, he said that's some stunning posters in the background. He wants to know what these posters are. So
They are They are from the project we did for Nokia.
Ah, okay. So it's about, I guess, multiple scripts. It's not just Latin
Exactly.
then.
Correct.
Okay.
Latin here on the right, and then several writing systems on the left.
I don't even see Greek here. Or is it?
Uh,
No, it's Hebrew on it,
no,
or is it?
no, Hebrew on the top. No, we don't have Greek here.
Yeah. What a
Next
shame,
person.
Eleni. And you're sitting in front. You're from Athens, aren't you?
Yeah, I am. Yes, yes.
Okay. So, but lovely, lovely pictures. Okay. So now, since we know that, okay, and we know that there might be some typefaces that we are more exposed to and we read those better because we are more used to them, then but what is it? What is it when we're talking about fonts for accessibility? What is it? What makes an accessible typeface?
Okay, there are a few things, and before I start kind of showing or enumerating what it is, I want to say that it's not accessibility with typefaces is not a checkbox and that you need to have one, two, three, four, five, and then it's done. Of course, you need to have some of them, but it's not like you know how, for example, when you make a website and you can want to check the colors, for example, there are those tools online that you can put your uh, website and you get a result whether this is accessible or not.
Yeah.
Um, there's nothing similar like this for type because while there are some very specific rules, some things depending on the design of the typeface or the usage can be altered or can be changed, and you will still have a very accessible result because it's a bit more of a range rather than a binary 0 or 1, result.
Mm.
But um, to kind of shall I share my screen to show some
Yeah,
of
sure.
the things that are quite important when it comes to accessibility? So let me
But just to
show.
summarize this,
Yeah.
since we read more words than individual letters, as you explained before, we
Yes.
can compensate for a lot of things there
Yes.
because we will still
Yes.
get the word, except for a very critical situation like a document where you have an unfamiliar name or a
Yes.
passport where you have a specific ID on there or a coupon code
Correct.
even, so something like that, or a password or something where you really need to have legible and not without any no ambiguous characters there. But when it
Absolutely.
comes to reading, we can mostly say that this will make it more pleasant to read because we then can
Yes.
faster identify the characters, and also under more critical conditions like not being able to see it as clearly.
Exactly, exactly.
Okay.
And I actually have an example that I quite like, which I always think it's funny to see, which is this one here. We can ask the audience what they see
Yeah,
and
type
what
it
they
in the chat.
read.
What do you read here? What does Eleni love? What could it be? Yeah,
You have
because the thing,
answers?
yeah, we don't have yet, but we might have. I read them. I read to you. The question here is really, again, this is a situation where it can be unclear. I love
Yes.
cocoa. I love cocoa. We have from Peter. Ah, that's good.
Mm.
Okay. I love cow, says Mike Mai. Do you?
There
I
we
love
go.
cocoa. I love cocoa. Cow, says Agnes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's not clear. Yeah.
It's not clear, but
Yeah.
once you see this, the answer
Yeah.
does become clear. And I think it's
Of
exactly the
course.
point you're making, right? That if we use typefaces as a logo or a title, there is context that will fill in the gap very, very, very quickly for us.
Yeah.
It does become extremely critical, as you said, if it's a passport, or I have an example which I love, which is this one here. That was during the pandemic. A colleague of mine found this and shared it with me. So this was like the COVID test, and like
Top tip.
and there was a top tip saying if your barcode doesn't work, try to replace a 0 with an O or a 1 with an L. And I was like, isn't it impressive that they ask millions of people to do that?
This is
I
hilarious. Yeah.
I thought this is
It's
brilliant.
It's not hilarious if you really want to
It's
get
very
a
sad.
result.
It's
It's
really
sad.
sad.
It's sad. Yeah, it's bad. Benjamin
And
also said, "I love WW." So this was another
oh,
one. Yeah,
interesting.
it's
Nice.
yeah.
Nice.
It's good.
But
Yeah.
I think this is why, and you know, that's something very, I'm always also very nervous when I talk about accessibility. I don't want people to think that they cannot do exciting and expressive things anymore. They can and they should. It's just knowing when you can be expressive and you can, you know, because uh, the accessibility will be kind of filled in with the rest of the information that is there. And when you don't have room to play and you have to be 100% accessible, and this is a very good example. Or I have a personal example where I showed up in the wrong airport because I saw the wrong terminal. I confused terminal 5 with terminal S. And
Ah.
so I confused the 5 with the S because it was only saying terminal, 5 or S. And I don't know, the airport was not that clear to me at least. And, I made a huge mistake that, was actually really hard to fix from a personal perspective. So this is where we cannot play with accessibility, right? And we need
Yeah.
to be 100% accurate and 100% correct. So to kind of show some examples of what we need to consider there, here are some good examples, and I would say those are like very important rules to kind of keep by. So very often, and I'm sure we'll go more into details about that, but very often we hear that Arial is a very accessible typeface. Sadly, it is not, because if we look at, for example, the C, it closes quite a lot, right? So it can easily be confused with an O. So imagine you're running somewhere that you have a blurred vision. This gap is very, very small and very quickly is going to close. Equally, if you look at the A, the E, the S, they are so kind of packed with information that, again, if you were to blur this out, it would look like a circle with something with a bit in the middle. Whereas this is a typeface from our library, dark mode, and we've the main emphasis of this typeface is to be extremely accessible. And what you'll see is that the C is very, very open. So as a result, no matter how much you push the boundaries and blur it, it will never close. And it will
Mm,
always instantly more quickly look like a C. And same for the
mm,
A and the E and the S. You can see that everything is a lot more open. So overall, type like letters or typefaces with letters that have features that are more open rather than grotesque typefaces like Arial are much better for accessibility
yeah.
than
Yeah.
than the top one.
Yeah.
Um,
But then on the other hand, when it comes to this with typefaces like grotesque typefaces, the ones that are most widespread right now are SF Pro
yes,
or San Francisco Pro by Apple,
yes,
which is the operating system font, and Roboto obviously by
yes.
Google, and both are in this genre of grotesque typefaces, and they kind of fit into this same category, as you would say, as Arial, which is still better than Helvetica when it comes to open apertures.
The thing is, the thing is that um, it's very interesting you're bringing this example because I have looked into the differences between those two. Because one could argue that the design is quite similar, right? And um, that's why I was saying it's not a check box of rules, and depending on the designs, there are a way of doing it. But if you look at San Francisco, for example, it is closing, but a little less.
Yeah,
So it's still a grotesque, but not that much. And the most important thing is that San Francisco has a more generous letter spacing. So
yeah.
it makes everything breathe a little bit more. Whereas Arial is very tightly spaced. And as a result, this is kind of also a very big problem
Mm,
of the accessibility part. So yes, you can have grotesque typefaces that are accessible, and it's not an absolute no-go, but one it's you have to have you need to know which ones you can use for good accessibility, because a majority of the grotesque typefaces are not that accessible. But that doesn't
yeah,
mean do not use grotesque. There are some that will have that.
yeah, yeah. Hmm.
Um,
You want to
the,
dive into another feature?
I want to dive into this one because I also find this very interesting, and I think I was thinking the same before diving into the whole concept of accessibility, which was I used to think, and I think I
Mm,
speak for a lot of us, that the simpler the letter, the easier it is to read.
yeah.
This is a problem because it doesn't go this way. Simplicity it doesn't equal accessibility. Especially if we look at Latin typefaces, the way we read is that we mainly focus on the top half of the letters. So to kind of, when we're doing this saccadic movement that I was saying with the little jumps, our
Mm,
eyes will mainly focus on the top part. And if they gather the information they want, then they can move on. If not, they need to go to the bottom part. So if you have a Q, an A, and a G that are the single story, like the top that you see here, your eyes need to go on the bottom part,
mm,
and therefore you slow down the reading speed. Whereas if you have the double story A and the double story G, you can see that you can instantly recognize
mm,
what's there. You don't need the full information. Um, so it's very, very important to kind of not think that the simpler, the easier. In fact, when it comes to typefaces, some sense of granularity and change is very important between the letters because it helps with the recognition, especially with the A, which is an extremely frequently used character. Imagine if every time you see an A, you have to be like, is that really an A or is it not? So
or is it
this
a
is
G or
another
is it a
feature.
Q? Yeah, yeah.
Yes. So that's a very like very important other feature. And of course, there are some others like you do want your lowercase l's to have a little tail. You do want your F and your T not to be very narrow, and breathe a little bit more. But those would be like the key points, I would say.
Mm, mm. Yeah, that's a very good because we have definitely these rumors or these ideas that accessibility is
Yes.
the simpler the shapes, the better it is. And
Yes.
I see it just from my observation. My 7-year-old, she's just learning to read. She's first grade in elementary school, and or just learned, started in fall. But she still mixes up an A if it's very simply
Mm.
made, and she can. And this is the thing when it comes to creating more unique shapes of words that we can more easily, let's say, grasp when we do our
Yes.
saccadic movement,
Yes.
don't serif fonts that are more distinct, where the characters are more distinct due to the serifs, of course, because that's easier to tell apart an uppercase I with a lowercase l, for example,
Mm.
or a
Mm.
G with except if it's a very geometric serif typeface, a G
Yes.
and an A. But in that sense, wouldn't that say that serif typefaces might be even more helpful when it comes to this? Because let me just add another spin to this. When I look at some recommendations, let me read a few to you, yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
let's keep this question
Yes.
sans serif in mind, because we have often, for example, here you often quoted this, and it's lovely, from the Clearprint guidelines from Euroblind Union, which is the Association for the Blind in Europe. Um, they say choose standard fonts which with easily recognizable upper and lowercase characters without serifs. Sans serifs. Verdana, Arial, and Helvetica are good choices. There we have it again, Arial and Helvetica. And then another one would be, you are less likely to run into issues if you're chosen a commonly used typeface. Fonts available in all modern operating systems like Arial, Georgia, Carrier New, which is a monospace typeface, Times New Roman. This is from Practical Web Inclusion and Accessibility by
Oh,
Ashley
wow.
Firth. This is a book on accessibility. And so they kind of it seems to be a bias towards sans-serif fonts. And to me as a designer, I felt it hurt me because I love serif fonts, yeah, and it depends on the project always for me if it fits the mood. But is it that way? Is it sans or is it serif, Eleni?
It's so many things to say on this. I love that. I love the stats. Um, if, shall I say about the Sans-serif first or about the guidelines first? Which one shall I
Yeah,
go?
let's dive into the sans versus serif first, I guess. Yeah,
Okay,
and then the
perfect.
guidelines.
Um, okay, when it comes to Sans-serif, there has been a lot of research that has happened throughout the years, and I have to say, from the ones I've seen, the results are quite inconclusive. Some find serifs more legible, some find sans-serif more legible. Both, no matter which one wins, usually the difference is very small, which kind of indicates to me that the sans or the serif is not the only, it's not the main variable. I think, not I think, in my the reason why we have kind of now become more used to sans and we associate sans typeface with accessibility is, if we go back in print type and we think of books or newspapers, I'm pretty sure any book you pick around you, a literature book, not a design book or something else, but like a, the one you read on the train, most likely it's with a serif typeface. If you pick a newspaper, most likely it's with a serif typeface, and it's long form reading text, and we've never questioned that, right? And we read it quickly and endlessly, and we, also cognitive recognition is very quick. And I personally, and this is not a scientific claim, I'm on your side. I think serifs, because they have the details, they help with this. However, when digital environments came into place, there were not enough pixels to show those serifs, right? And therefore, there was this decision that was taken to start using sans serif typefaces because it worked better with the technology that existed back then. Nowadays, if we think of the screens that we have, they are very high resolution. So technically, we could interchange between sans and serif typefaces. But it's a bit what we were saying before. We've become creatures of habit, and we have been used to have sans mainly on digital environments. And because we consume more digital environments, or many times a brand will mainly have a presence online and secondary on print, I think this is where the kind of bias of the sans has kind of, been more imposed. But it is, it's a likability matter. It's not a legibility or readability. So in that accessibility part that I was saying, is that people like or prefer a sans on a digital environment. But if you were to do readability or legibility tests, the results would actually be quite, not too far. But we have become creatures of habit. So, this is where it kind of goes. But there are plenty of serif typefaces that are extremely accessible, and personally, I would highly recommend them. We need just to be aware of the medium where things are used, because users have a certain expectation, and you don't want to, exactly, if you're running for an airport or if you're doing your COVID test, you don't want to have people to try to start, double guessing what they're reading.
Yeah. So just started a poll, giving people the answer and then asking them if they have the right opinion.
I love that.
I never could do polls because I was always the one person doing a live stream, and now I want to use this advantage.
Yes.
So since there are a lot of conversations already going on in the chat, so just that you know, we will address the issue of accessibility and dyslexia coming up, so no worries about that. Also about if we always have the same fonts or not, this is also something that we definitely will cover. So just to make sure that you're on the right place for these things to be discussed. So, but now when you say, is it serif, sans-serif, when we choose a sans-serif typeface, then we should consider that that the shapes or that the letters are easy to distinguish then. And maybe we also should address this in its context a bit more, because it might be more crucial for running text or for functional text. And if it's just a headline, if it's just a very short display text. And this is also a question that Weiss posted on pinmytype.com in the comments. Aren't we always then drawn towards the same kind of typefaces, the same genre, more or less, maybe more dynamic, opened letter shapes, or maybe a grotesque that has been treated so that apertures and they are more differentiated here. Aren't we then drawn more towards these kind of typefaces, and don't we lack diversity then? What do you say about that?
I think we do, but I think it's out of fear and not out of necessity. I think if we're talking about titles, if we're talking about logos, I think we we can and we should push the boundaries of expression, because we're talking just about a few words. There is usually context, and therefore speed won't be decreased. It's very important to also differentiate clear print versus large print, or in case users don't know the in case people don't know the difference, I can quickly kind of illustrate what that
Yeah, sure.
means. But it's something I wasn't aware of. I learned it moving to the UK, when part of that research that I was doing back then, um, I went when I went to the bank to sign this. Basically, I was told that there are two versions: there's a clear print and then there's a large print. And the clear print is all the pamphlets that you will find when you go to to a bank, and they will have color, they will have images, they will have a title, and long form
Mhm.
reading text. And this is like for the large audience to use. And then if you have a special visual impairment, you can ask for the large print. And the large print has stripped down all the information that can create confusion, such as colors, such as images, such as hierarchy that can be ambiguous, or the sizes of specific requirements. So it kind of goes a little bit the same way, when we draw also on the web, that
Mm.
if uh, when it comes to the long form reading text, yes, we need to be accessible 100%. When it comes to the titles, we can use something that is a little bit more expressive. After all, this is what is really going to also create the excitement, right? Like, it's very rarely that you'll see the text font and be like, "Oh, this is the most exciting text font."
Yeah.
It's the large titles that are going to kind of create the brand tone of voice, and
Yeah.
feelings. And I would always recommend, and love to hear your opinion, since you're the the user and typographer there. But in my opinion, titles should and can be expressive, because it's just a few words. There is context. Um, there is time to read them comfortably, and
Mm.
yeah.
Yeah, it very much depends. I would say as well. I shifted you in the live screen.
No
Action
worries.
going on. So, but the question here is, aren't we always using the same fonts then? Yeah, because I also thought about this, and maybe this is my wish for variety, and I really enjoy browsing typefaces always. So
Mm,
this is the reason why I do the Font Friday newsletter. This is why I do my reviews, because I want to have a reason to look for a new typeface every
yes.
week. This is the part of a project I enjoy most. But for a lot of people, this is one decision to make, and a lot of other decisions, and
Mm,
it's a cumbersome decision, and you have to find a good typeface, and you have to consider so many things. And as for example here, Vice said in the chat, where it is, where if it's a business environment, if it's for internal software, and clients are very, very reluctant to pay for typefaces and
mhm,
invest in licensed fonts, it's not that easy to convince them to pay for something if it's only internal, and you can say, well, you can use Open Sans or you can use Roboto and it will be fine and it will mostly be
mhm,
good. And I always say, yeah, you kind of pay the price if it's about being recognizable and unique in a sense. But then again, if it's only internal, I think it's a fair argument to make to use open, available, and free choices in that sense, because maybe it isn't not the most important part in here. What are your thoughts on that, Eleni?
I think every brand and every company have their priorities, right? And yes, you first have to kind of look at the priority of the full visual identity, and then when it comes to type, also there can be different options and solutions. And um, yes, it's there isn't a one model that is best than others, and it can be a combination of things as well, right? It could be that um, a company that maybe doesn't have the budget to kind of go with something that is more unique, or a licensed font. um, Maybe there can also be a compromise where they have maybe something more unique for the titles, right? Which is the biggest part of the tone of
Mm,
voice, and then maybe something more standard for the smaller print, yet ticks all the boxes of accessibility or weight requirements that they have, or writing systems. There's a lot that can be added there, but
yeah.
of course, not every company can have the same solution, right? And it's all about putting down your strategy, your visual strategy, and working with that. I would always say, however, that it's good to speak with experts that can guide you within that, because I find that very often there's misconception of what can be achieved within a certain time frame or budget, and maybe there are ways to tick more than one box and staying within the constraints that this project has. So I would say, speaking with people that know and can guide you is what I would recommend most, rather than saying, oh, I'll only do this.
Mm, yeah, that's a good one. Gareth, hey Gareth, happy that you're joining. So from the readability group.
Oh yes.
Um,
Hi, Gareth.
awesome to have you here. So Gareth said maybe choose a short list of fonts that are emotionally appropriate and then use accessibility performance criteria to enable the most optimal from that short list to be identified. That's a good suggestion. Just to go how to go about it. And bringing us back to this thing, I'm sharing my screen right now, so you will not be able to see it in Zoom, Eleni, but no
Yeah.
worries. I think you can imagine, but you have these fonts, like for example this very playful typefaces, like here in that case we have Violina from Dalton Mark, which is a script font. It is not very legible, so to say, because it's not super clear what the characters are, and it's very playful and so on. And also, if I think, let's say, if we go to Pimp My Type and look at the recent review with Avril, Avril is super scripty, and it is very ambiguous. So this could be, the lowercase f could almost be a b or something like that. And but then again, in my opinion, this kind of makes the charm of these typefaces. And it would be horrible to use these for only for the complete text. Of course, it would be horrible.
You shouldn't.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You shouldn't.
You
No
shouldn't.
matter, not even considering accessibility. It's just not readable. Readable in
Yeah.
that sense, yeah, and legible and everything. So you will get it out of context, I guess. But in script fonts, the letter shapes are so different then. But then again, they kind of convey a feeling and an emotion. And if you use this for a title or something, it might still work.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was also one question which meant maybe you could just add it in a simpler typeface below that. And I don't have a clear answer to this, because maybe you can play around with it again and you can compose something there that's interesting and drawing you in. Because from what I took away from your talks and your content was that this part of likability.
Yes.
If we don't like it, if it doesn't draw us in, if it's not interesting to look at, what purpose does legibility and readability make if I'm not seduced in a certain way? Then there are not always these cases where you will be seduced to filling out this form.
Yeah.
Because you have to do it, and then you will do it. But in like a more competitive environment, you will be seduced in a way, and you will be drawn in, and your attention should be guided in a sense. So I think this would be an idea to go about. Was there anything else that you would like to add?
No, I completely agree. And I think, Volina, for example, is a typeface that should be used from 20 point upwards, right? The moment you think of something more than 20 points, you can be creative, and you really should. And people, I would hate if people, leave any accessibility chat or conference, or I think that there's only 3 typefaces that can be used. If it's a large size, it can be more expressive. But you mentioned, like, if it's filling in a form, this is small type. Usually you have to be 100% accessible, because a form will have names and surnames, and you don't know if it's an F or a B. Like it, you have to be 100%
Yeah,
sure of every single letter that you read and see. So it's
yeah,
all about understanding, first of all, the purpose of what you're drawing.
yeah, yeah, sure. And Gareth posted perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, coming from the WCAG. Where's the fun in that? I don't know, Gareth. I think we can make it fun. I hope so. Let's hope so. No, yeah, it's
We
still,
can, we can.
it shouldn't be it sets some minimum standards in a sense, and because it's such a delicate issue, there are no when clients ask me about what's the most accessible font, what should I pick, and then the question is always, yeah, but there's not that short list of fonts that you can
Yeah.
use. There are so many out there. You cannot just
Yes.
say it's this one or that one. It will depend on the situation, which
Yes.
kind of
100%.
brings us to a topic that a lot of people are super, super interested in, which are fonts for dyslexia. This is something that a lot of people discussed in the recent years because it brought more awareness, or more awareness was brought to this topic. It is estimated that 1 out of 10 people have dyslexia, and 70 to 80% of people with poor reading skills are likely to be dyslexic. And of
Mm.
course, this isn't dyslexic and not dyslexic. There are mild forms, there are more severe
The
forms,
range.
and yeah, there's a range. It's always a range.
Mhm.
People are a range. And just that everybody knows what we're talking about, I'm just sharing a few fonts that people see what I mean here. Yeah, so we have some typefaces like here, for example, dyslexia. These are these kind of typefaces where it says, yeah, or open dyslexic, which is also another very popular one because again it's a free one, which is then more accessible. But you see the aesthetics of this typeface are, let's say, it looks kind of broken in a sense, yeah. So, and I'm not saying that if anybody can be, or it has an easier time reading something with a specific typeface, who am I to say, oh, you cannot do that? Because, yeah, who am I to say that? And then we also have these very distinct kind of broken looking letters. Then we have lexi readable, which is also another one which claims to be like or Comic Sans, but for adults, and it's more grown up, and it doesn't is it's not that playful. It's just a bit more sober, but also soft and friendly. And back to the dyslexia fonts, where they distinct or deliberately changed letter shapes so that they are more bottom heavy, that you cannot mix up a D, a P, a Q, and a B in the lowercase letters because they are very different. And then we have Atkinson hyperlegible, which is not the dyslexia topic so much, but they also have very different letter shapes for P, Q, and D. Just looking at this here, the Q here, the P, the G. Okay, the G is not something that's in there, but the A and the G are different, and the B. So then, on the other hand, we have this Comic Sans issue, and there are things that are like, for example, here, the dyslexia friendly font Comic Sans. Here, an example is this post. Oh, commercials, come on. Why don't I have an ad blocker? I'm not cool enough for an ad blocker, I guess. But here we have their claims to say research has shown, they don't link the research, but research has shown that Comic Sans reduces cognitive load and visual processing issues, which are common challenges for people with dyslexia. The irregular shapes and varying sizes of letters in other fonts can cause confusion and make it difficult to distinguish between letters. And then we have something like this nothing's comic about dyslexia, which is a cool campaign, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
It's very cool because they kind of used Comic Sans, claiming that this
Yeah.
is easier for people with dyslexia to read from Dyslexia Scotland, and there they kind of show in a certain way that this is a playful typeface, but you should appreciate it and why it is better because of the X height and of the differentiated characters and the spacing and the bottom heaviness and things like that. And then we also have, like for example, Chantal Sans. There are quite a lot of things about going on here, where Chantal Martin, which is an artist, she created this together with Aerotype. They created a wonderful typeface, which is very playful, based on her handwriting. And there she just says, I was inspired by Comic Sans because I have always liked how fun and easy it is to read, especially for me as a dyslexic, since maybe also this tone of voice here from Chantal Sans or Comic Sans, that it takes this heaviness out of text, which is a bit more intimidating if you have dyslexia. So this could also be an issue. So we have a broad range of things here. So, and now let's just continue with your input on this. So how is it with dyslexia? So you saw the fonts. We went from very broken, very, let's say, they have a very broken aesthetic. They could help people, maybe. You have a bit more information on that. Also, Gareth has. And but what is it? What is it? Comic Sans, open dyslexia.
I'm personally always very skeptical when I see those headlines. There are those headlines like, oh, this typeface cures dyslexia. This one saves the planet. This one does this. This one does that. I don't know. Do you remember which one? There is one that claims to spend more ink when printing, and I think as humans, with any kind of news, headlines are, we are always kind of driven with those headlines, right? And I also feel that sometimes, because those are topics that we want to do the best, and we want to make sure that we address all the accessibility needs and requirements, people are looking for something to kind of to cling from, but to be like, oh, this is an approved one, I'm going to use it because it's approved. I'm always very skeptical when I see those headlines. I have to say, whenever they do come up once every 2 years or so, like there is always a claim, and every time I see it, I'm like, oof. And then I take a deep breath and I start reading, and I try to understand whether I agree or disagree with the claim. I have to say, for most of those typefaces that I've seen the actual research that has happened, I'm very skeptical of the research itself, because very often they compare one typeface to Arial, and we've established that Arial is not a good accessible typeface. So beating Arial is in terms of accessibility is not that hard, right? So a lot of those typefaces that are drawn specifically for dyslexia, if you read the how the research was done, you will see that usually it's this typeface compared to Arial, because a lot of guidelines say use Arial. I would have loved to see the result, based on something else. And actually, the readability group, and I'm going to share this. I know Gareth is on the call, and I'm sure he can say way more than I can about that. But there is something that I had found very, very interesting from that group, because for me, it's the first time that I saw a chart based on something that wasn't just Arial.
These results are super interesting. There's also a talk about the readability group from ACON or what was it? XCon. It was the conference where they gave this presentation. And I'm still trying to get Gareth and or Bruno and or Dave as guests for another live stream. Let's see how this will work out time-wise.
Till you get them, I'm gonna speak on their behalf.
Sure.
And I hope I do justice. But this is part of the research that was done by the readability group, and they asked people with dyslexic traits, and they asked putting whether they have dyslexic traits or not. And the interesting bit there is that if we look at all those, they tested a lot of different typefaces, and you can see Open Dyslexic was tested, Dyslexic, Comic Sans. Um, but then these typefaces performed very poorly, even amongst people with dyslexia. So the yellow here, sorry, the darkers always, or the either the dark yellow, the dark blue, showcase people that have identified themselves as having dyslexic traits. So you can see that SF Pro, for example, or Segway, or Verdana, or Bot, or BBC Reef, and so on and so forth, performed way better amongst this group of people with dyslexia than the typeface that were technically good for dyslexia. Now, as you said, Oliver, it can work for some people, and I'm not disputing that, but I'm more, because it's a range and it's a large group of people, one solution most likely doesn't fit all. So I was looking at this graph, and I was looking at all those kind of articles that make those big claims, and I was trying to understand, why would an article make such a big claim? Why would someone, say something if the data shows something differently? And there's something interesting, is that, in my opinion, and looking at this graph, those typefaces don't perform better for people with dyslexia. There are other typefaces that have good accessibility, that performs way better for people with dyslexia. There's something interesting, however. All those three typefaces, amongst the people that preferred them, the ones that preferred them were people with dyslexic traits versus people that didn't prefer it. And maybe this is where this is coming from. However, within that same group, those same people preferred way more other typefaces. So I think this is the kind of important bit to consider. In my opinion, those typefaces are not better for people with dyslexia, for the larger group of people with dyslexia. But potentially, for some people, I'm not disputing this in any way, because it's very personal at the end of the day. But if we were to draw something general, there are much better typefaces out there that have all the accessibility traits that and legibility traits that a typeface needs to have, such as the open C, the open A, the tails on the L, good spacing, which is super crucial, that perform way better than typefaces that claim to be only the cure for something. And I'm always very skeptical about that.
Yeah. There was a question by Matt coming up in the chat. Yes, this is from the research done by the readability group. So this is about fonts for dyslexic people or people with dyslexia. It is something that, or the thing that I always have is I still feel threatened by accessibility. As a designer, it's like, oh my god, they will take all the fun away, which is not true. If you just take a closer look at things, it is not true. It is not about making things boring, ugly, or something. But it is something that a lot of people, I guess, say because they don't want to bother, I guess. I just guess, yeah. And in that sense, when it comes to this, like, and now I'm forced to use Open Dyslexic if it fits to my project and I want to have this grungy, broken look, I think it would be an appropriate typeface for a little text, but then again, not for the reading text, because it would be too, broken. And I know it's intentional, but it definitely changes this. Does it fit the topic? And however it fits the topic, if it fits the concept, then you can justify anything, I guess. And
I think it's because we always try to have, because it's very hard to know and to learn all those things, and you need to do a lot of testing and research. So we always look for the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rules that we can follow and go through. I often hear like, oh, you need to have your P and your B and your D and your Q to look different. And again, there is other research that I've seen that shows that it doesn't make that much of a huge difference. Actually, it's the top 4 most performing typefaces some of them have the same BTPQs, some have different BTPQs, and there are bigger things. Like spacing is the most important. Open shapes is the second. A good recognition between an L and an I and an O and a zero is the third. There are a lot of different things, and they all interplay. Like, yes, there is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but there's also kind of a combination of those things. I would say, and I completely agree with you. And in fact, it's sad I can't talk more about that one, but we are currently working on a project with high accessibility requirements. That is also extremely expressive. Like it's super expressive and it's possible. And what we were doing to test the letters, we were kind of well, we've done also some user testing, but we were kind of blurring the letters, and the moment you blur them, you see that some of those details that bring the tone of voice and the expression that are quite funky almost disappear and kind of keep the skeleton where it should be. So accessible doesn't mean boring, and it shouldn't mean boring, but it just needs to. I would always recommend for people to reach out, you know, to people that know and can guide them, and then they can, you know, be a little bit more confident and build a confidence as well of what can be used versus what can't be used.
Yeah, and I think we are talking, we are really nitpicking here in a sense always, because we are focusing in such a tiny place here. And I think one thing that sums it up quite well is what Gareth just posted in the chat, which is accessibility is about meeting the functional and the emotional needs and preferences of users, which is wonderful. So thank you for adding that. And this also brings us to, okay, now we have an idea that open letter shapes are important, and if we don't mess it up completely, and if we don't use a script font for body text or something like that, and if we don't use something like Comic Sans, if it's not appropriate to a topic for a bank contract to sign.
Or for NASA's biggest, what was it, right? NASA had done this big announcement all in Comic Sans, right?
yeah, I know. But it's, if we're not, we can still ruin everything, even the most accessible typeface. And I think this is often forgotten by setting it inaccurately, by using it in a bad way. And so how can we, and now let's make it a bit, let's change it a bit, Eleni, okay? Are you up for that? Yeah? So
yes, of course.
So how can we make our text, we picked a great typeface, but now let's fuck it up. Let's ruin it, okay?
Okay, how can we do that?
Yeah, how can we do it? Give me something.
Well, the first thing is we can use tiny point size.
Good.
That's one thing. We can use a very hairline weight, because a typeface has from hairline to black, right? You can have hairline light, hairline thin, light, regular, medium, bold, extra bold, black. Like there are a lot of weights. Imagine you take a black weight and you use it in tiny. The typeface itself might be great, but not the black weight for a 10-point size text. So this is one way to definitely mess it up. Color combination, I would say, as well.
That's a good one. Mike just posted in the chat. Please, if you have an idea how we can mess it up, post it in the chat. Mike says 200% leading. All caps!
All caps. And the one that I know makes a lot of people very angry is tracking. Do not track your typeface, your text ones. I think if we again take a typeface and use it in display and realize that we want to track a few things, fine, right? Because it will serve a purpose, there's a reason, and maybe having it a bit tighter is also fine. But the amount of time I speak with people that use typefaces in long form reading text, and they either loosen up the tracking automatically because they felt it was too tight before. It's like, wasn't that an indication that maybe you should like that you picked the wrong one, or they pick the right one, as you said, like maybe it's a perfect typeface and spaced and current perfectly well for you for UI and text and long form reading text, and then they take it and negatively track it, and then suddenly all this balance completely goes wrong. So
Mm.
I think when it comes to accessibility, let's not start messing with things around. If we find ourselves that we need to mess around, maybe we haven't made the right choice to start with. So again, it's a matter of, asking and speaking and making sure that, the choice
Yeah,
is right. But I don't know, Oliver, I'm sure you've seen many other ways of messing up accessibility.
definitely, definitely. There's something when you talk about in the chat we had also fake italics. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, let's also talk
Yeah.
about italic then. Center text by Peter, and
Yeah.
Michelle says just saying hi. Hi, Michelle.
I
You will catch up later. The replay will be available right after the live stream. But yeah, it is definitely something that has more impact setting it in appropriately. And Michal said via email to me, ask his question about color contrast in that sense, yeah, and if starting off with font size, because I think this is most problematic here in that sense, or color contrast, whatever. If it is not contrasting enough, or or too small, doesn't
you're done.
you're done. It's just who cares which type? Who cares if it's Helvetica? Who cares if it's Times New Roman? But if it's light gray on white or dark gray on black, and it's in 5 pixels font size or something like that, you're done. You're just
Call it
done.
a day. Close your computer. Go for a walk.
It's true, absolutely. But do you have any input on that? Is there too much text contrast the other way around? So can it be too much? We have these minimum requirements that are
Mm,
very clearly pointed out in WCAG, and this is, of course, the most obvious and easiest to measure thing when it comes
yes.
to designing for accessibility and type, that you should have at least 4.5:1 color contrast when it comes to running text. So, or 7:1 if it's for triple A, but this is basically the idea of minimum contrast. Minimum doesn't mean you need to be exactly on that. It could be more, it should be more. And the maximum amount that you can achieve is 21:1,
Mm,
which
mm.
is text black on white or white on black. It's the same way around. But is this too much then?
I I think those are parts that definitely you have way more knowledge when it comes to the color contrast. There is one thing, however, that I want to point out when it comes to the typefaces is that, and we see this more and more where we use, I have my phone and I can change an app from light mode to dark mode. And what's happening now is that most of the times the typeface doesn't change, right? It stays the exact same typeface, it just changes color. What happens with that is that if you keep the exact same weight and the exact same typeface, when you have a white typeface on a dark background, it will look darker than the same typeface if it's black on a white background. And that's because of the halo effect that happens because of the screen. So, what needs to happen in those environments is that you actually need to go for a slightly lighter weight, um, but spaced in the same way as the darker weight, so that basically when you get that glaring effect, it fills in the gap of, and it will automatically look the same. We've created a typeface at Dalton Mag. It's called dark mode for exactly this purpose. And I think this is something that needs to happen more and more, because very often and maybe that's one thing that we forget to do, is that we use new techniques or new medium and new, ways of seeing type compared to what we used to, when we think again back to the book or the newspaper, where again there were many rules about how the type should be and the color contrast and all those things, but those were set based on those environments and those, printing techniques on paper. And sometimes we forget to assess things on digital environments, or what happens when you can suddenly switch color from light to black and, the dark to light. So yeah, I would highly recommend using typefaces that can adapt to those big changes if they are, or to also consider your design. If you are using a very light typeface on a very dark background, you might need to make adjustments compared to, even if it's just light on dark, maybe you need to choose a slightly lighter weight than what you would have used if it was black on white. So this is more my input when it comes to typeface and color and contrast than the actual ratio.
Yeah, that's true, because this optical effect that you described, I could really experience it. And dark mode was also the typeface. I'm just sharing my screen briefly and pushing away. Let me, sorry for that.
Okay.
Rude here.
It's okay.
But I did the design for the Association of the Blind in the state of Salzburg in Austria, where Mozart is from, and and in that sense, you were so generous, Daltmark, and sponsored dark mode for this purpose, and we used it on the website here as well. And you can switch from light to dark, and then it just doesn't change. And the cool thing here, of course, is that you can easily read it, and it's not so draining or straining in that sense, as you described it earlier. Yeah, so dark mode is definitely a great typeface. There's also Signica, which is a very likable and also a legible typeface from a free one. I reviewed it on Font Friday as well, which has a distinct style for light text on dark background. And it does not come with the same proportions when you switch the static fonts, I observed, but when you adjust the variable font, it stays the same. So, and I don't think it's such a critical issue if things might mildly shift, and you could still change font weight 400 to 350 if it's a variable font. So this would be a good workaround for most typefaces, so that it still has this contrast. But when it comes to contrast, and just when we think of this idea, when we read something, color contrast, and we actually, when we look into a display, we look into a light bulb, more or less, and it's like it's glaring at us. And if it's 100% white with 100% black, just think on your reading experience. If you're reading on a paper, you never have 100% white. Your paper cannot be that bright. So let's say you have 80%. I'm just guessing here, but it's easier on the eyes, and if you have less contrast here. So if it's not that harsh, so this is also a good rule of thumb, not using 100% black for your text, or not using 100% white for your background, and combining this, but still keeping things in mind. That they have to be contrasting enough when it comes to these minimum values. So what about italic text, Eleni? What about that?
Well, italic was always meant to be an accent, right? That's the concept of italics. They're meant to be a small accent, so it shouldn't be something. If you think of a long form reading text, it shouldn't be something that is all set in italic, because then you don't accentuate anything. In fact, if we think of italics is a relatively new invention. In the history. It's quite old, but it's not that uprights came into place. In fact, I've seen a very nice example of it was a German book, and to kind of emphasize, because italics didn't exist, they just took the uprights and spaced them out very, very much to draw attention to the user. So they added like a 30 tracking, like it was hugely spaced, just to really draw attention, but it was like in one or two words. And we should think of italics the same way. It's a typographic style that evolved for accentuating things, not for dominating the entire part. Again, if it's for a title and you want to kind of have a, I don't know, more romantic feeling, or flowy feeling, I guess that's fine. But when it comes to long form reading text, it should be really sparsely used.
Yeah. Also because in many cases, I think it's more condensed. So this is, because the letter shapes are more, since they originate from cursive, from handwriting, they are a bit more tighter as well. And when you're thinking of this German book or something, this comes from this tradition of black letter or Fraktur, since we didn't have a way to emphasize text in there except for spacing it out. This was the only option because maybe there wasn't the italic in black letter. It's not something they combined. They didn't combine the Romans, the uprights with the italics. So this just didn't happen. And so, and all caps you couldn't use in black letter because then it would be just a mess. Which is another thing that works, of course, since they combined minuscules or lowercase letters and uppercase letters in Latin script, which is also not something that was there from the beginning. But we're diving into type history here, so it's something very different now. But then again, italics are definitely something that works for emphasis. But I think if you really want to emphasize something, change the weight. So, or change the case maybe for the word.
Yes.
If it's again, if it's one word in uppercase, it might work, but change the weight or in that sense. And there's also often a misconception about tracking and these things when it comes to accessibility, because you mentioned this before. What do we do when things are spaced out too much or too little? If they reduce tracking and they make or reduce the letter spacing, so to say in CSS terms, for everybody who is a front-end developer here, if you reduce the letter spacing, which might help for headings. If you're using a typeface, which is used for body text size, and then using it in a headline, you might decrease the letter spacing as you would increase the spacing in smaller sizes, so that it is not that letter shapes or that the individual letters are not drawn together so much and they have less pixels available to render then. So this also helps with legibility in that sense than in the smaller sizes. But there's also this thing with WCAG, with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, that says it should be, I'm not sure about the number, but 2% or 1% or something like that, or 0. whatever amps tracking and word spacing and everything. And a lot of people say you have to do this always. And no, you don't. You should be able to change tracking, to change line height, to change word spacing without clipping off the content, and not by default.
Absolutely, because also when we change tracking, either positive or negative, remember the saccadic movements that we're saying of 7 to 9 characters. If we track things negatively, then suddenly in that saccadic movements we add 10 or 12 characters, so it makes it a lot harder to you have a lot more to recognize. If you loosen it up, then you have to make way too many jumps to read this one sentence. Overall, I would say for text, we should use typefaces that are well spaced and kerned, and we shouldn't be touching this unless from very specific circumstances, like we just discussed, like with the light and the dark mode. Maybe there things need to be kind of addressed. For titles, it's slightly different.
Yeah, that's true for titles, because then it kind of tends to fall apart. The larger it is, the more space it uses up. And the space, which was fine in a smaller size, the spacing before and after letter is then a bit too much in larger sizes, and then it needs some treatment.
Agreed.
And we also have an addition from Gareth here. Don't forget that every screen is calibrated differently. Ambient light is an issue. People turn brightness down and up and so on, and to save battery life. So this is also something we should consider. And there's also this thing with the APCA, with this recommendation for WCAG 3, which is a bit different than the traditional color contrast measuring, which is a great idea and a great concept, but still it's not part of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which are in force now with the European Accessibility Act. So it's a good idea, but we still have to go with the old stuff. Exactly. So, wow, we are quite a long stream, and happy that you're still joining us. If you have a final question for Eleni before we wrap this up, I have one or two myself, but don't hesitate, type it in the chat, and then we'll wrap this up so that you will also have some time to recreate from so many questions that I asked you today. So very, very happy that you joined us tonight or today. So we also have the question that came in about the italics. This was what I wanted to point out. This was from Adam from Beautifully Accessible, which is a wonderful, wonderful Instagram channel where you can follow Beautifully Accessible. It is just great advice in bite-sized advice how to make things beautifully accessible. So thanks for your question, Adam, here. And yeah, then we have from Lisa another question. Lisa Weishäupl asked on LinkedIn, I read somewhere that all left-aligned text is more accessible. I'd love to learn more about this and hear your take on it. Center text can add visual interest and change the look and feel in a good way. So I'm curious how you tackle this topic. So should we avoid center text at all, Eleni? What do you think about this?
I'd love to. To be honest, that I feel this is a very typographer question, so I'm gonna bounce it back to you. My feeling says yes, but I'd love to hear your. I'm sure you have more insights on this.
Yeah. So my point on this is, we have an issue with, let's say, if it's continuous reading, it might be a bit hard because your text will always start from a different point when you go from left to right. In Latin script, we read from left to right. In Arabic, in Hebrew, in other scripts, this will be different, obviously. Then it would be right aligned. But if we use right aligned text or center aligned text in Latin script, you have not the same starting point. So when you jump from one line to the next, it is just more cumbersome for a lot of text, for more than 3-4 lines, for very, very half a paragraph, 3 sentences or something. Nobody cares about this, because if it's 4 lines, you will not lose the line most likely. But if it's more than that, I definitely recommend using left-aligned text and not justifying it. It can never be justified to justify text.
Never, never. No, I completely agree, because you have a point of reference, right? If it's always at the same line.
Yeah.
So again, that because the more we start reading, the every time we start reading, we start a little bit slower, and then the more we read, we kind of get in the habit of reading. So if we change the habit at every line, we disturb this kind of rhythm that we have put in place.
Yeah. That's true. That's true. So we have a question from SBLTN, all in caps. What's your favorite ampersand?
Oh, huh. I don't know. I love plenty of ampersands, and I have to say, go wild with the ampersand, because when it's used in a very specific environment and setting. So everyone is expecting to see an ampersand. Like, you could put a flower in an ampersand. I'm over exaggerating here, right? But you know what I mean? Like, it's usually a very specific. You almost expect the ampersand to be there, so you can be decorative. So there's the one that looks more like the E and T, the et, and there's the one that looks more like a flipped 8. They all work, and you have some that are even more decorative that can open in one side and close on the other side. It's always the joy of the type designer to draw the ampersand, and there are some letters and symbols that allow for more playfulness. So I don't have a favorite, but I do like expressive ones. And the same goes, for example, the uppercase Q is usually a letter that type designers will have a little bit more, expression injected there, because it's not a very frequently used character in any language that use the Latin writing system. So again, it will always appear in type parts of the word that you really expect to be there. So you can be a little bit more generous. Or the lowercase g, those are characters that we usually tend to have a bit more fun, because kind of no matter how much you stretch them, they won't break completely what you have. Again, not for something that accessibility is super, required, or long form reading text or UI. You don't want people to start seeing flamboyant things showing up. But yeah, I don't have a favorite, but I do like when they're flamboyant, those 3 characters.
It's hard, isn't it?
Do you have a favorite?
I don't, but Mike has one, and I'm going to share it. It's I am fell. I'm not sure, Mike. Do you tell me if it's the right one that I'm sharing? I kind of lost my window. Too many windows here. So this one was the italic one from Mike. So this obstructs Eleni now. So
It's okay.
you're hidden behind an ampersand.
That's okay. Perfect.
But I
I
have
quite
to
like
say,
the ampersand from Blenny
yeah,
from our
yeah,
library.
Plenty is hilarious. It is hilarious.
Yeah,
It's
so
such a
nice. I don't know
joyful
if you
time.
can bring it up, but it's yeah, I like that
Yeah,
ampersand.
yeah, I'm going to look it up. But regarding this as a great segue into the question from Gareth. Gareth is asking, because since an ampersand is a ligature of an E and a
Yes.
T originally, what do you think, Eleni? Do you think that ligatures present a possible issue, or are they like serifs in that they have a function in forming word shapes, or are they purely aesthetic? What do you say, Eleni?
Very good question, and we are discussing it almost every time for a project here at Dalton Mag. Um, and we have found that depending on the design, there are different solutions that work best. Um, I'm talking from an accessibility perspective. So most of the times when we have designed a serif typeface, we have found that having a ligature like FI, FF, FFT, FF, FT usually helps because it kind of um, reduces the spacing between the F and the T, and because the serif usually have a little bit more flaring, it doesn't disrupt to have this kind of horizontal line going through. If anything, it adds to kind of the tone of voice and the overall cohesion, visual cohesion. So we tend to see that with serif typeface, ligatures work quite well. When it comes to sans-serif typefaces, if and again, I don't want to say this as a number one rule because it depends. And as I said, we do discuss it every single. Actually, I had this specific discussion this morning in the kitchen with a colleague of mine for a project that he's doing, and he's like, "What do you think? Shall we do this way or shall we do this way?" I was like, "Let's test it and see." Mm, I want to say the majority of sans serif typefaces that are good for accessibility, um, I wouldn't legate. So hear me out till the end. I would add the ligature, but not one that ligates. So we always think of ligatures as something that you have the F, and the T, and the bar becomes one, right? We think of something that kind of becomes a new symbol in itself. But there are some ligatures which don't have to touch each other. But for example, what we do, if you remember what I said before, that you want the F and the T to have usually a little bit more presence for better accessibility, because if they are too narrow, they're a bit hard to distinguish. But if you have two Fs in a row, having this wider F might suddenly create too much of a big gap between one F and the other F. So what we usually do is that we make a slightly narrow F F combination. They don't touch, but they're just slightly narrow so that the spacing between the letters is closer. So it is a ligature if you think about it. It's just not the visual result that we would expect in the ligating part. So um, I would say for a sans, usually, especially for a utilitarian accessible sans, I wouldn't ligate them because I think that suddenly that might break the reading rhythm or introduce something that somehow doesn't happen in the other letters. I would though design them slightly different than the conventional F and the T, a little bit narrower, maybe bring the spacing a little bit closer together. When it comes to serif, I tend to see that the proper ligature, like what we think of the visual, touching each other, works quite nicely.
Yeah, that makes sense. So a ligature that doesn't ligate. I never heard
Yeah.
that, but I love it now.
Yeah,
I'm
I've
pulling
made
up.
it up. I've
I'm
made it up.
I'm obstructing your view with Blenny, the ampersand. It's just
Nice.
that everybody sees it. Yeah, you see Blenny is super playful. I love Blenny.
I
It's
love it
also an
too.
Adobe fonts, so if
Yeah.
anybody wants to use that. So very, very cool. So thanks a lot, Eleni. So is there anything else that you would love to add when it comes to accessibility, wrapping this up?
There's one thing I want to say, and that is to be very careful with guidelines, and you mentioned a few, right? While you were talking, Oliver, they say, oh, use this and use this typeface versus another typeface. A lot of those guidelines I see have a lot of mistakes, for various reasons, but one important one is that very often guidelines is something printed, is black and white. And very often guidelines are done 10, 20, 30 years ago. And maybe a lot of things, A, were different in terms from a technological perspective. Maybe there were not that many font choices, right? I don't know when those first guidelines started saying use Arial, what were the other choices? You know, like it was Arial and what? What was the
In
opposite to it?
times.
And yeah, so things change a lot. And um the moment we put something black on white, it 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 can become the wrong norm. And it's very important to A, review our guidelines, B, challenge them, and C, maybe try to understand a little bit more what they really mean. Because unfortunately, and that's a talk for another day, but there are quite a lot of mistakes, and some very obvious ones, in those guidelines. So I'd be, some of the latest ones are very, very good, but some of the older ones that unfortunately are still, very much prominent, are to be used with a very big pinch of salt.
Yeah, that's true. So thanks for reminding us of that. Also, Gareth said guidelines are just guidelines, not
Yes.
rules. Yeah, they are
Yes.
not set in stone. So, um, yeah, thanks a lot, Eleni, for sharing all
Thank
your
you.
wisdom with me and with everyone else on the live stream. Where can people go to find out more about you, what you do, who can follow you?
Well, we just, I work at Altamag, and we just launched a new website, and now we kind of try to explain things a lot more as well. So I'd say definitely follow us, on Instagram, and look at the channels. But also reach out to me if you have a specific question, and I'll be always very happy, because I feel a lot of times we said here, it depends on this, it depends on that, right? And I'm very happy if people have specific it depends scenario, that I'm very happy to kind of discuss more. So I'm available in all social media, so happy to be,
I
reached out
link
there.
them. I'll definitely link
Perfect.
them in the on the website, then in the show notes. And yeah, so I just want to say thanks a lot, Eleni, for being with us today. And
Thank you.
to everyone else, thanks for joining. Thanks for all your questions. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing. And don't forget to subscribe to the Font Friday newsletter as well. Also featured some fonts from Dalton Mark there, which is always a pleasure to review. I really enjoyed being with you tonight, and I hope we see each other in the next